I was never the favorite. That title always belonged to my older brother Ethan. My parents didn't just love him more, they worshipped him. I was merely an afterthought, a shadow in his golden glow. If he wanted something, he got it. If I wanted something, I had to prove it, earn it. And even then, it was usually denied. Birthdays? Mine were shared with him. Christmas? He got the better gifts. Achievements? His were celebrated, while mine were dismissed. If he failed, it was never his fault. If I failed, it was proof that I was inferior. As kids, Ethan bullied me constantly. He would break my toys and laugh. If I complained, my parents would tell me, "Don't be so sensitive, he's just playing." But if I so much as accidentally touched something of his, I was grounded. He manipulated every situation to his advantage, and my parents let him. When we became teenagers, it only got worse. Ethan always had the latest gadgets, the nicest clothes, and the biggest allowances. I had to work a part-time job just to afford simple things. If I complained, my parents would remind me that Ethan is the firstborn, so of course he gets more responsibility and privileges. One time, I saved up for months to buy a laptop for school. The day after I brought it home, Ethan claimed he needed it for a project. My parents took it from me and handed it to him without a second thought. When I protested, they scolded me for being selfish. Of course, Ethan never gave it back. My high school years were lonely. My parents constantly compared me to him. Ethan was more athletic. Ethan was more charming. Ethan is going to be so successful. Even though my grades were higher than his, they still treated me like I was a disappointment. Then came college. My parents paid for Ethan's tuition in full, including a nice apartment near campus and a generous monthly allowance. When it was my turn, they told me there wasn't enough money left. If I wanted to go, I had to take out loans and get a job. I was furious, but I didn't fight them. I knew by then that resistance was pointless. So, I worked. I studied. I struggled. While Ethan partied through college without a care, I juggled classes and shifts at a diner, barely making ends meet. But despite it all, I succeeded. I graduated with honors, debt hanging over me, but proud of what I had accomplished. Meanwhile, Ethan barely scraped by. He had no job lined up after graduation, no skills, just an entitled attitude. Still, my parents coddled him. They let him move back home rent-free, while I had to find a place of my own. They made excuses for his failures while dismissing my hard work. And then, I met Jake. Jake was the opposite of my family kind. Supportive, and always on my side. He saw the way my parents treated me and hated it. When we got engaged, I was determined that my wedding would be about me for once. But my parents had other ideas. Ethan, of course, had to be the center of attention. At the engagement party, he made a speech about himself. At the bridal shower, he loudly complained about how much money my parents had spent on my silly wedding and joked that they should have saved it for him. Then came the wedding planning. My parents insisted Ethan be my co-maid of honor. I refused. They whined, guilt, tripped. But I stood firm. Then, the final betrayal. A week before the wedding, my parents sat me down and dropped a bombshell. "We're giving Ethan your wedding venue." Apparently, Ethan had met a girl and decided to get married. They thought it would be so wonderful if we shared a wedding, with him and his fiancée getting married first, and me second. They had already told the venue to make the changes. I was livid. Jake was ready to call off the wedding altogether, but I had a better idea. I calmly agreed and acted like the perfect, obedient daughter. But behind the scenes, I was planning my revenge. The day of the wedding arrived. Ethan and his fiancée were up first. They basked in the attention as if it were their own private event. My parents were over the moon. congratulating them endlessly. Then, when it was time for my ceremony, I made my move. Jake and I had arranged everything in secret. At the last moment, we announced that we had moved our wedding to another venue, a beautiful, extravagant location that my in-laws had generously paid for. We had only invited guests who truly supported us, leaving my parents and Ethan's friends standing there confused. As I walked out, I handed my parents a bill for every penny they had ever taken from me: college loans, rent, stolen items, everything. And I made it clear, if they ever wanted to be part of my life, they would pay it back in full. The look on their faces was priceless. Ethan was furious. My parents sputtered, tried to argue, but the damage was done. Jake and I had the wedding of our dreams, surrounded by love and real family. And as for Ethan, well, I heard his fiancée left him shortly after when she realized he had nothing to offer. Sweet, sweet revenge. But that wasn't the end. A few months later, my parents tried reaching out. At first, it was guilt-tripping. "We're still your parents." Then came the excuses. We only did what we thought was best. Finally, the desperation. "Ethan is struggling. We need your help." Now they had to live with it. Ethan's life spiraled. He lost his job, moved back home permanently, and racked up debt. My parents, realizing he wasn't the golden child they thought, were now stuck with him, and without me to manipulate or take from, they had no escape. Meanwhile, Jake and I built a beautiful life together. I found true happiness, free from my family's toxic grasp. And that was the greatest revenge of all.